Barron Trump destroys TV host. His response leaves America in shock. The stage is ablaze with light, and millions of viewers are watching as a confrontation unlike any other is about to unfold. Seated before them is a seasoned host, a master of sharp wit, a man who has made even the most formidable politicians falter under the relentless scrutiny of live television. Tonight, he has a new target, Barron Trump, a name that stirs debate, a young man who has never truly stepped into the political arena, yet has always been drawn into it. The host smirks, his eyes glinting with anticipation. He has prepared meticulously for this moment to dismantle Barron, to unravel him in front of the public. Carefully crafted questions and psychological traps, woven into casual conversation, have been laid out. Everything is set. The audience leans in, eager to witness the unraveling. They expect hesitation, stammering, perhaps even the slow collapse of a young man, unprepared for the brutal glare of the media. But there is one thing they do not yet know. The one they are waiting to see fall may not be Barron at all. Tonight, this interview will take an unexpected turn. This is not just a battle of politics, it is a battle of wit, resilience, and sheer strength of character. And the moment the first words are spoken, the world will hold its breath, because Barron Trump is not someone who falls easily. Inside the studio, the air is thick with tension. Hundreds sit in the audience while millions more watch from their screens at home. The stage lights cast a dramatic glow, illuminating the face of a man who commands the world of American media. His name is Richard Caldwell, a veteran journalist, a man who has gone head-to-head with politicians, business magnates, and some of the most influential figures in the country. A master of verbal warfare, he wields questions like scalpels, cutting, dissecting, shaping his guests into whatever narrative he wants the audience to believe. Many have walked onto this stage with confidence, eager to prove themselves, but most left with their reputations in ruins. Richard is a name that carries both admiration and resentment, praised for his sharp intellect, yet despised for his relentless, ruthless approach. To him, television is not just about delivering news. It's a battlefield where the strong assert dominance through words, logic, and the art of absolute control. And tonight, sitting across from him is a very different kind of opponent. Barron Trump steps onto the stage. He is taller than nearly everyone in the room, but it is not his height that commands attention, it is his unshakable calm. No fidgeting, no nervous glances, no sign of unease. He moves toward the chair opposite Richard with effortless composure, dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit. Every step is measured, every movement deliberate. His expression is confident yet restrained, powerful yet understated. A low murmur spreads through the audience as they absorb the presence of Barron Trump, a name burdened with expectations, scrutiny, and speculation. The young man, who grew up under the blinding spotlight of politics yet has never truly stepped into it himself, prompts the question, who is he? A naive newcomer thrust into the media's ruthless game as a pawn in a larger battle, or someone far more formidable than anyone expects, someone ready to carve his own path? Richard Caldwell smirks. The game is about to begin. Welcome, Barron. The first have to say, this is an interview a lot of people have been waiting for. Barron gives a slight nod. Is that so? Richard leans forward, his eyes gleaming with the sharp anticipation of a predator who has just spotted his prey. You know, the public is always curious about high-profile figures, he says smoothly, but there's something different about you. He pauses, letting the moment stretch and ensuring the weight of his next words lands with precision. No one really knows who you are or what you stand for. Silence blankets the room. It is an undeniable truth that throughout his childhood and teenage years, Barron Trump has remained an enigma. Unlike others in his family, he has steered clear of political speeches, social media controversies, and heated debates. His rare public appearances have only fueled the mystery surrounding him, and that is precisely why people want to decode him. Yet Barron does not rush to respond. He rests one arm against the chair, calmly studying the man across from him, taking his time. Today is the day I'm supposed to define myself, Richard smirks. Isn't that something we all have to do? The air grows heavier, and the audience holds its breath, sensing that this conversation will not be a typical interview. This is a battle with no weapons, no gunfire, only words, psychology, and the ability to control the game. And as Richard flips the first page of his notes, the audience knows the storm is about to begin. For a brief moment, the studio is silent. The only sound is the faint rustling of paper. Richard Caldwell slowly flips through his notes. He has conducted hundreds of interviews, and no guest has ever walked onto his show without being tested from the very first moment. Barron Trump sits across from him, calm, composed, showing not the slightest hint of unease. His piercing blue eyes study the host, steady and unhurried. It is this quiet confidence that intrigues Richard the most. Leaning back in his chair, Richard smirks, his fingers loosely resting on the table. His voice is light, almost casual, but everyone knows this is just the warm-up before the real battle begins. Barron, the first have to admit I was surprised when you agreed to this interview. You're not exactly someone who seeks out the media spotlight, are you? Barron tilts his head slightly, his deep voice, smooth but firm, responds, I don't seek attention, but I don't run from it either. Richard nods, his half-smile unwavering. Fair enough, but let's be honest, people don't really know you. They've seen you in photos, caught glimpses of you in rare public appearances, but you've never truly spoken for yourself. They're asking, who is Barron Trump? Barron remains as steady as ever. Maybe tonight they'll find their own answer. Richard nods again, eyes glinting with intrigue. This is what I was hoping for, a real challenge, a test of wit and composure. He leans forward slightly. All right, let's start with something simple. His gaze locks onto Barron. You were born into a family name that everyone knows, a name tied to power, wealth, and controversy. Has that ever felt like a burden? Barron clasps his hands together, leaning forward just enough to show engagement, but not tension. Pressure is a part of life, but what matters more is how you face it. After a pause, a measured, calculated response, the game has begun. Richard narrows his eyes. And how exactly do you handle it? Barron meets his gaze unwaveringly. By not letting others decide who I am. A brief silence follows. The answer is sharper than Richard had expected. Quickly adjusting, Richard pivots. All right then, but let's be honest, growing up in a family like yours, did you ever feel disconnected from the real world? The audience holds its breath. This was a trap. If Barron said no, he would be seen as out of touch, oblivious to the struggles of ordinary people. But if he said yes, he would be admitting that he had been sheltered in a bubble of privilege. Yet Barron does not flinch. His voice is measured, each word carrying weight. Everyone grows up in their own bubble. Richard, the question isn't where you were raised, it's whether you have the courage to step outside of it. The audience erupts. Richard presses his lips together. Even if he is frustrated, he does not show it. Fair enough, he concedes. So let's talk about you, Barron. If not for the Trump name, who do you think you would be? It is a simple question, yet layered with implication. It forces you either to define yourself or fall into the host's carefully laid snare. Barron simply shrugs, his composure intact. Maybe I'd be someone different, but one thing is certain, I would still work hard to become the person I want to be. Richard arches an eyebrow. And who do you want to be? A slight smile crosses Barron's lips, someone who isn't defined by others. A hush falls over the studio for the first time. Richard flips a page in his notes, his gaze sharper than before. This is only the beginning, yet he already knows Barron Trump will not be easy to manipulate. The real battle is about to begin. The atmosphere in the studio grows heavier. Richard Caldwell now knows that his opening questions have done little to unsettle Barron Trump. The young man is sharp, self-assured, and possesses an ability to turn the tide of the conversation in a way that few guests have managed before. But Richard is not one to back down. He has seen some of the most powerful people in the country falter under the relentless pressure of his interviews. And tonight, Barron might just be next. Resting his hands on the table, Richard leans forward, his voice dropping to a lower, more deliberate tone, one carrying an unmistakable challenge. You know, Barron, no one chooses the circumstances they're born into. But when you're born into a family as powerful as yours, do you truly understand the responsibility that comes with the Trump name? The audience is laser-focused now. This is no longer polite conversation. Richard is sharpening his questions, aiming directly at Barron. But Barron remains composed, His gaze is steady as he gives a slow, thoughtful nod. I understand that the Trump name carries a lot of power, responsibility, and expectations. Richard offers a small smile and asks, has it ever felt like a burden? Barron pauses for a brief moment, then answers with surprising candor, the burden isn't the problem, the challenge is how you choose to carry it. A flicker of something unreadable passes through Richard's eyes. Barron isn't deflecting, he's steering. Richard narrows his gaze. That sounds simple, he remarks with a hint of skepticism. But have you ever wondered? Has your last name propelled you further than others, or has it merely made everything easier? A murmur ripples through the audience. This is a dangerous question. If Barron admits to having privilege, he risks being seen as detached from reality. If he denies it, he'll be labeled dishonest. Yet his expression remains unchanged. Leaning back slightly in his chair, Barron meets Richard's stare with quiet confidence. What is privilege, Richard? Is it being raised with better opportunities than others? And if so, what about the child of a doctor who receives an elite education? Are they privileged? Or is privilege just a label we place on those whose names stand out? Richard parts his lips, ready to counter, but Barron isn't finished. His voice is steady, deliberate. Where someone is born doesn't define them. What defines them is what they choose to do with it. A name can open doors, but it doesn't walk you through them. The audience erupts, some people applaud, while others exchange impressed glances. Richard narrows his eyes slightly. Not only had Barron dodged the trap, he had turned it back on him. Taking a deep breath, Richard doubles down. The battle is far from over. Then let me ask you this, Barron, with all the power and influence your family holds, do you believe you are bound to follow the path of politics? Barron allows a small smile to form. Bound, no, guided perhaps. Richard raises an eyebrow, waiting for him to elaborate. Barron remains calm. I don't believe a name or a family dictates anyone's future, but I also won't deny that my environment has shaped me. Politics isn't something I avoid, but it's not the only thing that defines me either. Richard shakes his head, letting out a light chuckle. Smart answer, but be honest. Barron, have you ever thought about sitting in the same seat your father once occupied? The room freezes. This is the moment the audience has been waiting for. Barron doesn't rush to respond. He locks eyes with Richard, his expression deep in thought. A long pause stretches between them before he finally speaks. The question isn't whether I want it. The question is whether America is ready for a different kind of leader. The studio erupts. Some audience members rise to their feet, clapping and whispering to one another in hushed excitement. Richard narrows his eyes. The game has shifted. Barron isn't just answering questions, he's controlling the conversation, and Richard cannot allow that to continue. With deliberate force, he slams his notes onto the table, leans in closer, and sharpens his tone. All right, Barron, if you're ready for the tough questions, then let's go deeper. The air in the studio tightens. Barron leans back in his chair, a light smirk playing on his lips, always ready. The audience holds its breath. They know what comes next will no longer be a conversation. The real battle begins now. The atmosphere inside the studio shifts, tighter, sharper. Richard Caldwell has been waiting for this moment. So far, this interview has been a strategic exchange between two well-matched opponents. But now he is ready to escalate, ready to ask the one question that could put Barron Trump in a corner, a question that not just the audience in the studio, but the entire nation wants answered. Leaning back in his chair, Richard folds his arms and locks eyes with Barron, his gaze calculated. You know, Barron, he says slowly, people say many things about your father. Some revere him. Others believe he is the most divisive figure in modern political history. So tell me, and be honest, have you ever felt ashamed of anything he has said or done? A hush falls over the room. This question is heavy, dangerous. It doesn't just target you, Barron. It directly challenges the legacy of Donald Trump. If you defend your father, you risk appearing biased and uncritical. If you criticize him, tomorrow's headlines will tear you apart. It is a no-win situation. But Barron doesn't flinch. His expression remains unreadable, his posture unshaken. He meets Richard's gaze head-on and responds calmly but powerfully. Have you ever been ashamed of anything President Biden has said or done? A ripple of reaction sweeps through the audience. Some chuckle softly, others hold their breath, stunned by the reversal. Richard blinks for the first time tonight, He seems momentarily unprepared, but he quickly regains his composure, shrugging nonchalantly. The game is far from over. This isn't about me, Barron, he says, keeping his tone as neutral as possible. I'm not the one sitting in that chair answering the questions. Barron's gaze remains unwavering. His voice, low but firm, carries through the silent studio. But you are a journalist, the one posing these questions to make the public think. He pauses slightly before delivering the punch. So tell me, why is it a fair question to ask if I'm ashamed of my father? But if I ask you the same about President Biden, it suddenly isn't. The room freezes. Richard presses his lips together, knowing he can't let Barron control the conversation. He quickly pivots, shifting to a different attack. All right, let's talk about politics more directly, he says, his tone now sharper. Your father has publicly claimed the election was stolen. Do you believe that? It is a loaded question. If you say yes, you risk being labeled a conspiracy theorist. If you say no, you risk being seen as disloyal to your father and his supporters. The audience watches intently, but Barron does not waver. He leans back slightly, his voice even contemplative. I think the real question isn't what I believe, he says steadily, but whether our system is transparent and trustworthy enough for all Americans to believe in. Richard raises an eyebrow. So in other words, you're refusing to answer directly. Barron shakes his head lightly. No, I'm saying that trust in our system shouldn't depend on individual opinions or political sides. It should be built on transparency, accountability, and public confidence. If half the country believes something is wrong, instead of dismissing them, maybe we should focus on making the system more trustworthy. A ripple of applause breaks out from one side of the studio. Some members of the audience can't help but admire the sheer precision of Barron's response. Richard tightens his grip on his notes. He now understands that this young man is not someone who can be easily cornered, but he still has cards left to play. All right, he says, his voice dropping lower, the weight of my next move pressing into the space between us. Let's talk about the future. If you don't believe the system is perfect, do you intend to change it? Do you plan to follow in your father's footsteps, step into politics? It is a game-changing question, and the audience collectively holds its breath. This is the moment they've been waiting for. Barron inhales lightly, his deep blue eyes flickering with thought. He does not answer immediately. Instead, he lets the moment linger, allowing the question's gravity to settle and every single gaze in the room to lock onto him. Then, finally, he speaks, his voice slow, deliberate, and layered with meaning. People always ask me if I plan to enter politics, he says, but maybe the more important question is, if I do, will people truly want a new generation of leadership, or will they cling to what is familiar? This time the silence lasts longer. Richard blinks. He was not expecting this answer. He had anticipated a definitive response, yes or no. Instead, Barron flipped the narrative, turning the question into something larger, something that forced the audience to question themselves. The room stays frozen for a beat, then erupts in applause. Some audience members rise to their feet, clapping with admiration. Richard now knows he is sitting across from a different kind of opponent. Barron Trump is not a politician, but he is also not someone who can be pushed into a corner. Richard adjusts his posture, rolling back his shoulders, then slowly he smiles. You're sharp, Barron. But let's see how far that sharpness will take you in the next round. Barron lets out a quiet chuckle. Let's find out. The match is far from over. It has only just begun. The atmosphere in the studio has shifted. The unwavering confidence that had long defined Richard Caldwell now shows subtle cracks. He is a seasoned host, one who has pushed countless guests into uncomfortable corners, but tonight, against all odds, Barron Trump remains unshaken. More than that, he is slowly taking control. Richard knows he is losing ground. Barron has skillfully deflected every politically charged question, turning potential traps into moments of strength. A less experienced guest might have stumbled, but Barron is not that guest. Caldwell understands that if he continues down the political route, he will not regain control, so he pivots. If he cannot break Barron through politics, he will target him personally. Richard places his hands on the table, his voice softening, yet beneath the warmth lies something sharp. Barron, let's be honest, he says, his piercing eyes locking on to the young man. Have you ever truly felt like a failure not because of your last name, not because of politics, but you? Barron Trump, have you ever looked at yourself and thought, I failed? The question is different. It is not a direct attack, but it is aimed straight at Barron's psyche. The audience falls completely silent, waiting for his response. Barron does not answer immediately. He holds Richard's gaze unflinchingly. Then, in a slow, steady voice, he speaks. I think everyone has failed at something, but what matters is how we face it. Richard smiles, though his eyes remain calculating. Then tell me, Barron, can you share a time when you truly felt like a failure? The audience leans in. This is a psychological trap. If you reveal a significant failure, you risk being perceived as weak. If you refuse to answer, people will see you as arrogant, a delicate game. And Richard Caldwell is about to find out how Barron Trump plays it. Barron leans back in his chair, moving slowly as if he had already unraveled Richard's intent. I could tell you about a time I got a bad B grade on a test, he says, his voice deep and steady. For a time, I lost a game. But I don't think true failure comes from things like that. True failure is when you allow others to decide your worth. Silence falls as the audience sits frozen. Richard raises an eyebrow. He had not expected such an abstract response. He lets the moment stretch before applying more pressure. So tell me, Barron, are you allowing others to decide your worth right now? Barron shakes his head and lets out a slight, almost effortless smile. No, because I know who I am. The response is too strong, too definitive. A murmur ripples through the crowd. Some audience members exchange glances, while others nod in admiration. Richard feels that if he doesn't act now, he will lose control of this conversation entirely. So he pushes harder. Barron, he says, tilting his head, his voice probing deeper into the young man's mind, do you really know who you are? Or are you just a name, a product of media perception, a shadow of your father? The tension in the room peaks. This is the most personal question yet. Barron meets Richard's gaze head-on. He does not flinch. Then, slowly he leans forward, his voice calm yet imbued with undeniable presence. If I were just a name, he says, then why am I sitting here answering these questions myself? A wave of energy surges through the room. For a moment, even Richard is left speechless. The studio erupts. Some in the audience clap. Others exchange glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to admiration. Richard realizes his mistake. He had tried to corner Barron with personal pressure. Instead, Barron had flipped it, transforming the moment into an opportunity to define himself. Richard clenches his fist under the table. He is losing, but he is not done. There is still one way to regain control, and to do it he will need to shift the conversation entirely. The next questions will not be about Barron Trump as a person. They will be about the future of America, and Richard Caldwell will do whatever it takes to push Barron into a position he cannot escape. The tension in the studio is razor sharp. Richard now fully understands that his psychological tactics have not only failed to shake Barron Trump, but have only made him stronger. Barron has turned every single question into an opportunity to define himself, flipping the script and controlling the conversation. Richard knows this is the moment. If he doesn't seize back control right now, he will become the first host to be outmaneuvered by his own guest, live on national television. He loosens his posture, then suddenly he leans in, his eyes sharp, his voice cutting through the silence. All right, Richard, he says, this time dropping all pretense, no probing, no warm-up, just a blunt, high-stakes question. Do you believe your father was truly fit to lead America? The room is so still that the audience can hear their own breathing. Some people in the crowd shift forward in their seats, eager for the response. Others exchange glances, knowing this is the moment of truth. Barron is cornered. If he says yes, he will be dismissed as biased, a son blindly defending his father. If he says no, he risks becoming a traitor in the eyes of his father's supporters. Every eye is on him. But Barron does not flinch, does not shift, does not avoid the question. He simply sits there, composed, facing the inquiry as if it were just another challenge to be dismantled. He exhales a soft, controlled breath, then speaks. Richard, you're asking me a question that millions of Americans have already asked themselves, debated endlessly, even fought over for years. But the real issue here isn't what I think. What matters is what the American people thought, and they answered that question with their votes, with their voice, and with what they witnessed throughout my father's presidency. The audience absorbs his words. For the first time, Richard does not have a retort ready, because Barron has done the one thing Richard didn't expect. He didn't let himself be the subject. He put the focus back on the people, and now Richard is left scrambling. Richard presses on, tightening his lips. He knows exactly what Barron is doing, steering clear of a debate he cannot outright win. But Richard Caldwell is not one to concede. He lowers his voice, shifts his approach, and sets a new trap. "All right then," he says, his tone calculated. "Let me ask it another way. If one day you had the opportunity to lead America, what would you do differently from your father?" It is a sharper, more dangerous question, not just about comparison, but one that subtly assumes you will step into politics, a topic you have never publicly declared. The audience leans in. The pressure intensifies. Barron Trump looks at Richard. His piercing blue eyes hold a quiet intelligence. A brief moment passes. Then a small, almost knowing smile crosses his lips. "What I would do differently is not as important as what I would keep the same," he says, his voice deep, measured, and deliberate. "Because if there's one thing my father taught me, it's this: stand for what you believe in, even when the whole world stands against you." A shockwave ripples through the studio. Some in the crowd clap instinctively. Others turn to one another, whispering. Richard feels that he has just run into a wall far more solid than he anticipated, but he is not done yet. He leans in further. His voice sharpens. "Let's talk about controversy then. Your father has been criticized time and time again for his blunt words and divisive statements. If you ever became a public figure, would you choose to be as outspoken as him, or would you take a softer approach, one that pleases more people?" It is a calculated strike, a clear dilemma. If you say you'd be just as blunt, you risk being labeled as reckless. If you say you'd play it safe, you'll be accused of weakness. Another trap. The audience waits. Barron closes his eyes for a brief second, then opens them, his gaze sharp as steel. Leadership is not just about speaking, it's about understanding. His words land with precision. The entire studio erupts. This time the applause is not hesitant. Some audience members rise to their feet. Others nod in agreement, murmuring to one another. Because at this moment it is undeniably clear. Barron Trump is no longer just a young man caught in a high-pressure interview. He is controlling the game. Richard tightens his grip on his notes. This is not how he expected things to unfold. He had anticipated an opponent who would falter under pressure. Instead, Barron Trump has forced him to shift tactics over and over. This interview is no longer a one-sided interrogation. It has evolved into a true battle of intellect and composure, and slowly but surely, Barron is winning. Richard exhales. He loosens his shoulders, adjusts his posture, but his eyes remain piercing. "Barron, you're very intelligent," he admits for the first time, abandoning his sharper tone. "But let's see just how far that intelligence will take you in the next part of this conversation." Barron doesn't blink. Instead, he tilts his head slightly, a small, knowing smile forming. "Let's find out," he replies. A ripple of anticipation surges through the crowd. This battle is far from over, but one thing is now certain: Richard Caldwell has lost control, and all of America is watching. "I won't step into politics just because my name is Trump, but I won't avoid it just because people think I shouldn't." His words land with precision, a statement, not a declaration. Barron Trump does not give a simple yes or no. Instead, he delivers a truth that cannot be ignored. He will choose his own path, not because of pressure, not because of expectations, but because it will be his decision. The studio falls into a deep silence, a silence that is not empty but charged, because the audience understands that this moment is historic. Barron Trump did not just survive this interview, he dominated it. Richard Caldwell, the veteran interviewer, the man who had controlled countless conversations, now sits across from the one guest who changed everything. He exhales slowly for the first time all night, his voice calm and reflective. "Barron, no matter what people think about the name Trump, I think we can all agree on one thing." He glances at the audience, then back at Barron. "You are not just another political figure's son. The audience erupts into applause, some stand, some clap slowly, taking in what they have just witnessed. Richard nods, setting down his notes. The battle is over, and Barron Trump walks away not as a boy defined by his last name, but as a man who defines himself. The lights dim, the show ends, but the conversation has only just begun. I won't let expectations define my path. I won't enter politics just because my last name is Trump, but I also won't avoid it just because people think I shouldn't. This is a statement, not a pledge, not a confirmation, not a denial, a declaration of independence. Barron Trump will walk his own road, where it leads will be his choice. The audience falls silent for just a moment, a rare, weighty stillness, then applause breaks the silence. First a few claps, then a ripple, then a wave. Some stand, some nod in quiet acknowledgement, because they know they have just witnessed something significant. Richard Caldwell sits back, absorbing what has unfolded. He knows this interview will not end here. Tomorrow, the headlines will not speak of Donald Trump's son. They will speak of Barron Trump, an individual, a force, a name of his own making. Richard exhales and turns toward the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen," he says, his voice steady, but filled with newfound respect. "No matter how you feel about the name Trump, I think we can all agree on one thing. Barron Trump is not just another political figure's son." The audience erupts once more. Richard turns back to Barron, a small, genuine smile forming. "You did well tonight, Barron." Barron nods, offering a calm but knowing smile. "Thank you." The lights begin to dim. The cameras prepare to fade. The interview may be over, but its impact will last far beyond this moment. Tonight, Barron Trump did more than hold his ground. He made the entire nation see him in a way they never had before. The interview is over, but its impact still echoes across the nation. People will talk about this moment, an interview that seemed predetermined, yet unfolded in a way no one expected. A veteran host, one who had dismantled countless politicians, business moguls, and public figures, found himself up against a guest who didn't just endure the pressure but completely flipped the game. The question now is no longer, is Barron Trump simply living in his father's shadow? The real question is Barron Trump carving out a path of his own? And more importantly, this story isn't just about Barron, it's about you. Imagine yourself in his position. If you were placed under intense scrutiny, with millions watching your every move, could you stand firm as he did? If someone challenged your identity, your past, your family, would you have the strength to define yourself on your own terms? We want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this showdown? If you were Barron, how would you have responded? If you were Richard Caldwell, would you have played the game differently? Join the discussion in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, if it gave you something to reflect on, an insight, or simply a moment of inspiration, hit the like button to support the channel. If you haven't yet, subscribe now so you won't miss the next story. Stories that don't just entertain, they inspire, they challenge your thinking, and they make you see the world from a new perspective. Thank you for being part of this journey. Disclaimer: this story was crafted for entertainment and inspiration, designed to spark deep reflections on identity, resilience, and the immense pressure of politics and media. All characters, events, and scenarios depicted in this video are purely fictional and are meant for illustrative purposes only. This video does not intend to misrepresent reality or make any political or personal claims about real-life figures. We respect all viewpoints, political perspectives, and diverse opinions. Healthy discussions are always welcome in the comments, as long as they remain respectful. Thank you for watching. We appreciate your time, your thoughts, and your support. See you in the next video.